Hi, I'm Stuart McMurray. I'm a red teamer, lead offensive security engineer, sorry. More importantly, I do Unix things for a living. That's socials and all of the code for the talk for all the examples and whatnot you can find here-ish. A couple standard disclaimers. None of this is my employer saying things, please don't commit crimes. So what we'll talk about first is sort of the general idea behind container compromise, so on and so forth. We'll look at a sort of a little sample target that we'll use for just having a playground for examples of things. We'll get some initial access to it, use that then as a springboard to look and see what it looks like inside a container as we're doing sneaky things. And then from there, we'll look at what it looks like outside the container from what we did. And then we'll go back into a container. So we'll go inside, outside, inside, more or less. Without further ado, so compromising containers on a philosophical level, what's compromise? First question. If we take a sort of a locked down something, a thing that we're not really expecting other people to have access to, and a nefarious conference room full of people, say, and the conference room full of people does a thing. It doesn't necessarily matter what. There's no like, this is a compromised thing, this is a not compromised thing, but a thing to give us some sort of access. Maybe read access, maybe we can change the state, maybe we can delete the state, but something that we're not really supposed to do, that is compromise. And container compromise, like any other compromise, takes a bunch of different forms. Next question then, what is a container? And if one were to ask an application developer, one might reasonably expect the answer that, well, it's just kind of where my application runs, it's all nice and self-contained, and this is true. And we'll just kind of go from there and build on that. Next philosophical question, why would we compromise a container instead of a nice Linux box like we're used to? And the answer really is just kind of it's where things run nowadays. All right, our dummy target is a single server and a conference room full of us. And it does not particularly matter what the server is. It's kind of a DevOps utility server, we'll say. It has a container, and the container that we'll be poking at is an HTTP checker, kind of a is my site up sort of thing. It also has another container running that's a password store, like I need a password for a thing. I don't want to have it on a sticky note, which has sort of a legacy backend database-ish deal. From a Docker perspective, and none of this is Docker specific, by the way. This applies to whatever container runtime. But from a Docker perspective, we have the password storage container. It's listening only on localhost, so we're not likely to be able to get into that from bad guy land, but we have the HTTP checker listening everywhere, and that will be our point of ingress, our initial compromise. So we will target this HTTP checker. It looks a bit like this, and we could give it a website, to check and see if it's working, and it will run curl for us and give us whatever curl outputs, so we can see yes, this website's up, or curl would throw an error. We, as great hackers, see that there's single quotes, and we see that we can put something between the single quotes. So we're like, shell injection. This is stock hacking, and this is not container specific, but stock hacking, and that will then make us a two commands and a comment. That's what we put in, and we get a slash as output. We're like, that's where our working directory is. Life is good. And so now we have done something in the container we really weren't meant to. So, that having said, what's a container? If we asked maybe the sysadmin running all this, he'd say, well, it really is just an application running on Linux plus some isolation and so on. There is, of course, a little more to the story. Let's talk about C2 real quick. In a nutshell, it's command and control. It's when you take control of a thing, you issue a command, you say, do this, it does it for you. And we'll want better C2 than having to type things into a website every time. On the red team side, especially, there's a few things I've found to be useful, helpful when you do this. It sounds obvious, but it actually has to work. So as you're thinking, hey, how do I get something calling me back? Despite what you would think, you do actually have to maybe put some thought into it. Number two, don't be a jerk. So encrypt your things. You don't really want whoever's paying you to go break into their systems to have stuff exposed. Don't install random stuff in somebody's container. Don't spike graphs. Spiking graphs is a great way to get caught, by the way. CPU usage is high. Network usage looks like this. That will make somebody talk to you. And maybe don't use SOC resources and time and effort more than necessary. And then simplicity is actually probably the biggest thing to keep in mind in two ways. In this sort of easy, like I just run one command and my infrastructure sets itself up, but also in this sense that the infrastructure, whatever your server side is sufficiently uncomplex that you can kind of keep it all in your mind at once. You know what every layer is doing, and that helps with troubleshooting. That helps when you're sitting in a conference room and somebody's like, hey, why do we have 16 beacons calling back to our Cobalt Strike Circuit 5 minutes ago? How to do that? The answer is simply just use whatever's there, is the easy way. All things being equal, I just SSH into boxes. Or whatever nowadays management software, SSM, or fleet management things. Man, fleet management stuff is like C2, but really expensive. Curl looped works pretty good. Windows and Linux, by the way, not just in containers, or just curl, which we'll actually be using. There's a bunch of frameworks that'll do this, that set stuff up nice and for you, that have all sorts of good functionality. Or custom code, which sometimes you hear is, oh no, custom malware, what do we do? I encourage you to write your own. It's really a cool first little offensive project. It's like little C2 thingy. Hour long, couple hundred lines of code. Anyways, TLDR, C2, which we will be using very soon, is just getting the target to do what you say. And to forestall future questions, this is a TLDR. Okay. So anyways, back to our C2, and there's people glaring at me now. Back to our C2 thing. We've asked the HTTP checker to check HTTP for us. Under the hood, of course, it calls a shell to call curl. And we're like, oh, shell, I can maybe hook the shell up to standard in, to curl, for standard in. Maybe I'll make another curl connection for standard out, standard error, have those curls call us back. And so we just have this nice bidirectional comms path to our shell. Sounds good for me. The only closest thing to a hacker tool we'll be using is this curl rev shell. It's kind of like your netcat reverse shell thing, but encrypted using curl under the hood with the reverse shell. Super easy to set up. Install it with Go. It installs itself. Run it. There we go. And it'll spit out a little one-liner, and copy paste it on target, and it will send this script to the target, which is just curl pipe to a shell pipe to curl. Super simple. So that's that second type simplicity. Everything is pretty easy. And if we do that, if we put it on target, hit the enter button, we're like, nice. It connected input and output. We have a shell. First thing we do is ask us to not have our history log just in case, and then dump a process listing. Like, hey, where are we? What is this box we landed on? And we find out very quickly we're in a container, as PS is not there. And then we look at the host name we get back, and it's like, oh, that is very container host name. It's long random things, but we're root, which is kind of nice. And things running as root is also kind of a container thing. So as a group of people who've just got a shell, let's ask ourselves again, what is this container we keep talking about? And really, it just looks like Linux, minus some things. Okay, which is cool, but then we've done Linux things before. What does that mean sort of on a container side? Let's take a side quest real quick and talk about proc. Proc is the answer to this sort of thing. So we tried a PS. It's like, no. We were kind of hoping for a PS that's like, hey, here's a process tree. It has all sorts of good information for you. We'll use proc to sort of get around this, and we'll use proc for a lot of things, more than just process listing. Proc itself is just another file system mounted that is a little weird, and not to have a circular definition, but you can use proc mounts to see, hey, my cursor is a cursor. You can use proc mounts to see sort of like what mounted file systems you have, and proc is in there. It's not really real files. It's a bunch of 0-byte things. It's a way for the kernel to talk to us and give us answers. We ask it things, and it gives us answers, but using kind of file-like things, opens and reads and closes and whatnot. It has all sorts of good information. It has information about processes. Each process gets its own numbered directory after its process ID, and devices and the network and kernel things. We can use it a bit like this. So ideally, we would have PS, and it would read a bunch of things in proc and format the output all nice and tell us it's running. Of course, it didn't work. And so we can just cut out the middleman and be like, hey, give me this info from proc. Let's read the link that this exe points to, which is the running file for a process. And the kernel's like, yeah, sure, it is this thing. And it looks like this. So now we have sort of a packish, container-ish process listing, minus the things that a process or that a container would not give us. There's a bunch of these interesting files that we'll use, and that now that you don't just get to SSH into Linux, you kind of have to use. Let's not read a whole slide here. TLDR. There's these great systemd files in proc that'll tell us things. All right, side quest complete. Back to the original question. What does it really mean to be inside a container? So we'll look inside a container, and we tried this. It did not work. We can try a little better with the whole where are we thing. And we'll just look at proc-pid command line, or proc** command line for all the PIDs. Command line's a file that has the command line arguments, the argument vector, or argv. For each of those, we'll echo the file name just for a visual break, and we'll turn null bytes, zeros, into new lines, because the argument vector is null separated and it's kind of hard to see. Looks like this. For proc1, we have a couple arguments, 3 of them, Docker init. Yes, this is a container. Many other things. There's sort of another PS-ish deal. There's us, by the way, the curl pipe to the shell, pipe to the curl. There's also proc self, which is a symlink from itself, from proc self to your own proc directory. It's handy if you have some level of access, but not a great amount of access, but you still need things out of proc, environment variables or whatever is a great place to find stuff. Thread self is similar. Also, we noticed the secret. So we sort of have our first win as a hacker. Zoom in on that. We found, oh yeah, there's a secret in there. And of course, the better practice is creds in the environment. And it's, entirely likely whoever set this up thought he was doing it safely with templating or something. And then the templating 6 layers later was like, oh, just put it in the command line. It works. But credentials being in the environment is kind of the right answer in some people's mind. It also looks like this. Helps to sort your environment variables so that things like thing, username, thing, password are all next to each other. And you find that it is just as easy to grab things out of an environment if you have shell already. And then next idea, okay, we'll put something in a file. Well, proc mounts, as we saw, has mounted file systems. We see that run secrets is mounted, and this is fairly common. And we look and it's 15 bytes, so we're like, I have now done an encrypted exfil over a pre-existing communications channel. I catted a file. Okay, so we did that, and that's what it looks like inside. What did that kind of mean? How did that all happen? It's mostly a bunch of restrictions or different answers a kernel will give you, not quite restrictions, largely in the form of namespaces. You can see this in proc pid, proc self, ns. There's a whole bunch of them, and these tags, more or less over here, is sort of like, hey, kernel, give me this set of answers. There's a mount namespace. Hey, kernel, tell me these files are here, as opposed to this other container which has those files here. There's a PID namespace, like you can see your PIDs, but not other PIDs. There's user namespace, which takes a long time to describe, but TLDR 2 zeros means that your user ID root inside is the same as root outside, though maybe less capable. And those 3 are hierarchical, by the way. So a parent namespace can see inside the child namespace, or an outside container namespace can see inside the inside container namespace. There's also net, which is not hierarchical. And then if you are outside the container, you cannot see inside a container namespace necessarily. And if index and if link for your interfaces are different, you're inside a container. And it's probably a VETH pair under the hood. There's also capabilities. So I was like, yes, 2 zeros for root is good, but 2 zeros for root is good if you have all these capabilities. And you can see them in capf. You can decode them with capsh. If you don't have all the capabilities, you are kind of limited root, and you are restricted. Capsysadmin, if you have that, by the way, gives you loads of superpowers. There's also control groups, seccomp, AppArmor rules, which are less photogenic than the others. Control groups are great mostly in the I have a shell sense. They just make everything die at once in a container. Like you kill the whole group at once instead of individual processes. Seccomp, AppArmor rules in the interest of time are something like kind of very roughly ACLs for system calls. Very roughly, I know, that are set in user land. So then TLDR escaping is just getting the normal set of all of these, getting the outside container namespaces and capabilities and so on. Quick aside, we talk about privileged containers sometimes, and a privileged container, knowing all that, is just a container that has fewer restrictions. It has more normal-ish namespaces. It has no AppArmor, so on and so forth. Docker uses the term, other runtimes use the term. Docker also is like, maybe don't do this if you don't have to. It's privileged containers nowadays are kind of like the chmod 777 sudo. Like you're like, hey, net can't listen on 443. I don't know, I'll sudo it. It works. Hey, my container can't listen on 443. I don't know, I'll privilege it. It works. So it's a good day if we find ourselves in a privileged container, as we did. Okay, so back to our constant question, what is a container? Well, if we ask a group of people who are maybe about to escape a container what it is, they'd say, well, actually, it looks like it's just a bunch of Linux processes that are kind of restricted a little. Okay, so we're inside a container. We stole some things. We're like, this is quite nice. There's probably more in this box that we would like. Let's get out of the container. There's a few ways to do that. Number one, you can, and if you search on Google or your favorite search engine, it's like, oh, look for a mounted Docker socket, which you can do, except you just get a privileged container out of that, which is what we are in now. So we've sort of short-circuited it. Kubernetes is the exception. If you have a kube socket exposed, then you can not only make a privileged container to break out of, you can make a privileged container like over there, and now you have lateral movement. You'll also find cgroups release agent frequently. I've never seen this work in real life. It's kind of old, patched, but man, it comes up in search results. More likely, if you're in a privileged container, you can just mount a partition, mount a chunk of disk, and maybe modify cron tab, call you back, modify authorized keys, SSH in, chroot into it, and you kind of, sort of have like a toe out of the container. And sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes you just need files in the host, and that is good. We'll actually use this trick called core pattern, Proxys kernel core pattern. We'll talk about it more in depth in a second, but it makes shorter-lived system changes, and if you script it up, it's actually quite fast, and I find it easier to not make a mistake. But anything that works really works. TLDR, we need something that we do inside a container that will make us a unrestricted outside process. So, theory behind core pattern. If we take a program or a process and it crashes just right, the kernel will read this pattern, a pattern from Proxys kernel core pattern, to figure out where to dump the core dump file, which is debugging information and such. And if that pattern just happens to start with a pipe character, the process or the kernel will be like, oh, I won't write this to a file. I'll just make a process to handle this. Systemd core dump d or something along those lines uses it. You obviously want your init process handling your core dumps. But anyways, it does that, and it'll take the argv from the pattern, so we have control over what process is started. It'll do this as root and as a child of the kernel thread daemon, so it looks a little less normal, I guess. Looks something in that section of process listing, you're like, and it'll put us in the normal C group namespaces, so on and so forth, so outside. And we get command execution, TLDR. We then have this outside container creation thing from inside with the core dump handler. Let's do a quick POC, see what it looks like. We'll make ourselves a little script inside the root of our container file system, a little bash script. And the first thing we'll do is we'll hook up our standard out and standard error to a file named the same as our script running.out. Oops, too many slides. And we'll just dump a process listing. It's an easy command. It tells us a lot of information. By the way, on the blue side, the one thing I really hope blue teamers don't run when I'm on target is this. Because I never really got into the stealth thing much. And it's like, it would be very obvious. But doesn't seem to happen much. Anyways, give the execute bit to this. Looks like it worked. We'll have a sleep running so that we can find our container in a minute. And then before we do anything else, we'll get the original core pattern so we can reset it. Just be kind to our target. This is what the pattern will look like. Procpid root there is from outside the container, or really from anybody looking in proc, the root of our file system, and then core handler is that same core handler. So that is a path to our script, and this P will be our PID outside. Oops. P will be our PID outside the container. Tick that in core pattern, looks like it worked. And then we need something to crash. We'll just spawn a sort of sacrificial shell, have it send itself segv, segmentation violation, which is a thing that dumps core, as it did. And we see that, yeah, we do have this dot out. That is this dot out. Excuse me. Looking at it, oh dear. Looking at it, we see that we are in the kernel thread section. So those are the kernel threads, square brackets, that top bit. Beg your pardon. That top bit, thank you. There is our, I can hack containers all day. I cannot get myself a glass of water. I very much appreciate this. There's a script running. There is systemd in it, so we are exactly where we'd like to be. Also, PS worked, so we're probably out of a container. Scrolling down a bit, looking at, thank you so much. Scrolling down a bit, looking at that sleep we started. There is our crashed shell, and it's still kind of sort of running because our core dump handler hasn't exited or spawned a new process or whatnot, like exec itself or whatnot. And we see, yeah, our container is just this chunk of process tree, nicely. We could do this now. Let's get a shell. Much better. Let's get a shell. So we'll use the same sort of bash script, except instead of hooking up standard out, standard error to a file, we will use exec to spawn another shell, like just replace bash with binsh, but we'll set argv0 to not malware for stealth, to not get caught. And then we'll hook up standard in with just this same curl command. So we'll have our shell call curl and hide itself. Looks like this, the same sort of sleep, same sort of self-sacrificing shell. Looks like it worked. And then last thing before we do anything else is we will reset the core pattern so as to be a little kinder. Got to call back with another instance of curl ref shell. And we see PS works. So again, outside a shell, but interactively this time, not with a file. That's that is the effect of exec -a. And it doesn't necessarily have to have a shell and all sorts of things under it if you're running just a standalone binary or whatnot. There are other tricks you could do to like hook up its child processes and output with other things. It's a lot of work. Scrolling down again, there's our sleep that we spawned to figure out where on Earth we are. And so TLDR, we have now a normal-ish shell that we used the core dump handler to get. So escape, excellent. Then, now if we ask a conference room full of people, so what is this container thing we've just been dealing with? We might say, oh, okay, so really it's just this chunk of a massive process tree that just kind of gets different answers from the kernel. Sure. Oh, and I am really low on time. Okay, so going outside in, our original goal here was this password thing. It looks like this if we just have that chunk of tree. We have a sort of REST-ish adapter front end, a forth written back end. If we look in the working directory, we see that there are no forth file there. We were kind of hoping we could just grab maybe passwords.fs. If we cd into its working directory, however, we see that we have these. So, okay, procpid cwd gets us a little weirdly in, like one toe into the container now. And we try and run forth, and we find out, yeah, forth isn't really actually installed, which is exactly what you expect on somebody's utility server. But we did steal a source file, which is kind of nice. So, okay, theft from outside in. We can try rooting ourselves into the root of the file system. There's that same procpid root. And we find PS isn't there, so we're probably back in a container-ish, kind of. We do find forth files. We find that forth is installed, which is a bit of a win. That's good. But it doesn't really get us that close to passwords. Let's try and figure out kind of what this thing is doing. So if we look at the file descriptors it has open, first thing we notice is there's a deleted file that we can just grab out of memory if we'd like. And there also is a same inode socket connected to standard in and standard out, which likely means it's being wrapped in some ways by the front end. And yeah, we see a suspiciously similar inode number. So sure, there is some wrapping going on. Procnet TCP or procpidnet TCP gives you it's kind of like netstat-ish, port pairs, and we see we kind of have like TCP port chiasmus going on. So yeah, they're talking to each other, which is nice. Inode numbers match up. Okay, network things. Quick theory behind entering a container. Network namespaces, thank you, sir, are not hierarchical, so we can't see in and out quite easily, so we'll have to do some sort of in. These also make things easier when you go in. So we could just be another process with some funny namespaces, and we'll just mooch a namespace from this process. If we look at the network namespaces, we find they're different, as one expects. Same with the mount namespaces. We'd like to keep our mount namespace, because we have TCP dump in our mount namespace, not likely in the container. We'll use nsenter to sort of mooch a namespace, excuse me. From that target process, we'll mooch the net namespace, keeping down. We can also use all if we want all namespaces. Further down our scrolly text, I worked with somebody who called this scrolly text until she needed something from LDAP, and then it was good stuff. Anyways, we find that we have a shell spawned, and that shell, if we look, has the network namespace of the target container and the mount namespace that we originally had. So good. So we'll have network visibility, also TCP dump to sniff the network. Going from scrolly text to scrolly packets, we find that we should be listening and loop back. Also limit the number of packets you capture, otherwise Control-C does strange things to you. We see that we have a request for what looks like an LDAP password from somebody who has a disparaging view of scrolly text. We found a password, glory be, mission accomplished. Under time. TLDR, entering a container, and we sort of half-entered the container, is really just making another process with the right namespaces. So what is a container? Yes, all of the above, depending on what sort of layer of abstraction you're working with. These are all what is a container. It is just all of these. Quick summary, container hacking is more or less just using Linux, but with proc. Escaping is just a non-restricted Linux thing. Thanks. Do we have time for questions? More ways to contact, plus the code. Please do not read the code, just use it.
We do have time for questions, and I will need to rewatch the recording a few times to get all of it. Very interesting. Any questions? Questions?
None.
I do have a question.
What is your question?
Not the one that we discussed before. Because it doesn't really fit. But you mentioned it several times that don't do that because you will get caught. Yeah. When you do like red teaming and like in your experience, how good are like containers monitored? So are you actually getting caught? Not at all. That's about my experience.
No. I was actually looking at this one rule set for, I couldn't tell you what EDR, and like at the bottom of half the rules, it was like, yeah, detect this thing, and if it makes too many packets here, and if it calls curl weird there, and like the bottom thing was, unless it's a container. So no. And Linux EDR and Linux security is not as robust as on the Windows side. Yeah. Good question, though. What's up?
What is the vulnerability that is necessary that the core dump escape works?
It's not. It's a built-in legit feature. If you can write core pattern, Proxys kernel core pattern, you win. There's no... It's just a known thing. I guess the vulnerability is you're running your container with too many privileges. But yeah, no, it's... Like I said, just using Linux. Weird.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I have a question. If you run Docker rootless and the container has no privileges and no new privileges flag, did you ever manage to escape such an environment?
If you have no new... So one of the downsides to 200-odd slides is this gets slow. Yeah, I had better ideas, I guess. If you run with no new privileges, which we'll see in like 10 minutes, and there's no... Oh, here we go. So yeah, this no new privileges, by the way, if this is one, you're having a bad day. Or I'm having a bad day and you're having a good day, I guess. Depends on how you look at it. And you have not the requisite set of capabilities. There's really not that much you can do. You can hope there's something inside the container, Docker socket or whatever, that lets you make another container. You can hope if you're in a cloud environment that the metadata store gives you creds to something, and that happens. And you may or may not be able to get from there back to another container. But yeah, no, it's not a good day if you're running rootless. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. But corollary, if you're running rootless, usually the goodies are in containers. So, yes.
Hello. Yeah. Oh. Waiting.
Hello, thank you for the talk. Could you recommend any services or tools which could monitor containers in the cluster for such unusual activity or something like this?
I know for two reasons. Number one, because I try to avoid like, this tool is good, this tool is bad. But actually the real reason is I have no idea. Okay. I'm on the other side of things, sorry. Yeah, no, I don't know. Other than your red team, your local red team. So yeah, sorry.
Any more questions? Otherwise, I guess you're here at the conference.
Before you go, could you just put the link to the slides up one more time so we could get a picture of it? Thank you.
Maybe.
You just want him to go through the slides again, right?
Remember the philosophical rambling girl? That Mrs. McMurray? Yeah. Her revenge right here. Yeah. Well, in 10 minutes, oh, there we go. There we go. Any other questions?
You can take my break.
Yeah.
I think, by the way, we are probably firmly into break time at this point.
Maybe just a quick one. I don't have much experience in containers, but as a red teamer, what I found useful sometimes just to exploit the application. Does it happen often for you? Like you have no privilege, but the application is there and then you can change it. Is it useful?
Yeah, totally. Oh. I mean, yeah, that's that like, why do we go into containers? Because that's where things run. That's where things run.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so totally. Yeah, and if you're sure you're in a rootless environment, you're not escaping, that would have just made a really short talk. Yeah. Same with like non-privileged container. That would have just been a really short talk. But yeah, no, totally. It is just Linux, right? Just funny Linux.
So we are in break time, I guess, for discussions afterwards. Just that's it. Thank you.